Well, this is strange news. The American Psychological Association says masculinity is a mental disorder. Sometimes we have to worry about the psychologists. Maybe they have mental disorders. This is by Sean Adeltabai from News Punch. The American Psychological Association has labeled traditional masculinity a form of mental illness under new progressive guidelines. What can I tell you? According to a new report, masculinity is both harmful and oppressive. APA's new guidelines for psychological practice with boys and men strive to recognize and address these problems in boys and men while remaining sensitive to the field's androcentric past. 13 years in the making, they draw on more than 40 years of research showing that traditional masculinity is psychologically harmful and that socializing boys to suppress their emotions causes damage that echoes both inwardly and outwardly. Quote, though men benefit from patriarchy, they also impinge upon patriarchy, end quote, says Ronald Levant, educational professor emeritus of psychology at the University of Akron and co-editor of the APA volume, quote, The Psychology of Men and Masculinities, end quote. Levant was APA president in 2005 when the guideline drafting process began and was instrumental in securing funding and support to get the process started. So the Gateway Pundit reports, they go on to describe the quote-unquote needs of men. The main thrust of the subsequent research is that traditional masculinity, marked by stoicism, competitiveness, dominance, and aggression, is on the whole harmful. Men socializing in this way are less likely to engage in healthy behaviors. For example, a 2011 study led by Kristen Springer, PhD of Rutgers University, found that men with the strongest beliefs about masculinity were only half as likely as men with more moderate masculinity beliefs to get preventive health care. And in 2007, researchers led by James Mahalik, PhD of Boston College, found that the more men conformed to masculine norms, the more likely they were to consider as normal risky health behaviors such as heavy drinking, using tobacco, and avoiding vegetables, and to engage in these risky behaviors themselves. Quote, because of the way many men have been brought up to be self-sufficient and able to take care of themselves, any sense that things are not okay needs to be kept secret, end quote. Rabinowitz says, quote, part of what happens is men who keep things to themselves look outward and see that no one else is sharing any of the conflicts that they feel inside. That makes them feel isolated. They think they're alone. They think they're weak. They think they're not okay. They don't realize that other men are also harboring private thoughts and private emotions and private conflicts, end quote. In the next section, titled Multiple Masculinities, the APA starts to ramp up the whack jobbery. Quote, the vision of masculinity may summon up an image of a closed-mouthed cowboy a la John Wayne, but there's more to masculinity than macho swagger. When the rules of manliness bump up against issues of race, class, and sexuality, they can further implicate men's lives. For example, the masculine requirement to remain stoic and provide for loved ones can interact with systematic racism and lead to so-called John Henryism for African American men, a high-effort method of coping that involves striving hard in the face of prolonged stress and discrimination. John Henryism has been linked with hypertension and depression. Race, ethnicity, and discrimination can also intersect with immigration status. As of official year 2017, 68% of unaccompanied minors who crossed the border were male. Most of these children arrived from Central America and Mexico, fleeing gang violence, according to Journal on Migration and Human Security, an additional psychological stressor. Other people's perceptions of masculinity matter too, and many of these perceptions are rooted in racial stereotyping. Y. Joel Wong, PhD, and colleagues have reported that, at least among white college students, Asian American men are viewed as less manly than white or black men. Men and boys of color may also be viewed with suspicion by schools, law enforcement, and others, leading to harsher punishments compared to white men and boys says Christopher Liang, PhD, a psychologist at Lehigh University, Pennsylvania, who helped draft the guidelines. Quote, boys and men of color are dealing with all their hurts and their struggles in ways that are consistent with masculinity, Liang says. So be tough and don't show your hurts, and they have to do this in a system where their behaviors are looked upon more negatively than boys and men from different groups, end quote. These dynamics play out in the prison system as well. As of 2014, black men made up 37% of the male state and federal prison population and were more than 10 times as likely to be incarcerated in state or federal prison as white men. Hispanic men were also represented, making up 22% of the prison population, despite making up only 8% of general U.S. population. Gender and sexual minorities, too, most grapple with societal views of masculinity. This is an ever-shifting territory. When Levant and Rabinowitz launched a guideline-drafted process in 2005, only Massachusetts recognized same-sex marriage. Today, transgender issues are at the forefront of the cultural conversation, and there is increased awareness of the diversity of gender identity. Quote, what is gender in the 2010s? End quote, asks Ryan McDermott, PhD, a psychologist at the University of South Alabama, who also helped draft the men's guidelines. Quote, it's no longer just this male-female binary, end quote. So there is now more flexibility in gender norms than 30 years ago, according to Liang and McDermott. Boys and men who identify as gay, bisexual, or transgender still face higher than average levels of hostility and pressure to conform to masculine norms. The 2015 National School Climate Survey found that 85% of LGBTQ students reported verbal harassment at school over their sexual orientation or gender expression. Gender non-conforming students reported worse treatment than did LGBTQ kids who conformed with traditional gender norms. These kinds of results indicate that gender policy still occurs, Liang says. Sexual minorities or gender non-conforming boys and men may face strained family bonds or even familial rejection, and family supports can make all the difference in mental health. A 2016 study of a community sample of transgender children led by Christina Olson, PhD at University of Washington in Seattle, found that those with supportive families were no more likely than non-transgender children to have depression and were only slightly more likely to experience anxiety. Now they go on about how to change the culture, quote unquote. First, clinicians must be aware of dominant masculine ideals and cognizant of their own potential biases. Second, they must recognize the integrated nature of masculinity and how factors ranging from spirituality to ability status to age and ethnicity interact. Mental health professionals must also understand how power, privilege, and sexism work both by conferring benefits to men and by trapping them in narrow roles. They should consider how stoicism and a reluctance to admit vulnerability hamstring men in personal relationships, and they should combat these forces in part by encouraging fathers to engage more fully with their children. And they should offer services sensitive to the socialization that men have undergone while fighting against homophobia, transphobia, racial bias, and other types of discrimination in situations such as a criminal justice system. The APA closes the report by explaining how to support the positive. The clinician's role, McDermott said, can be to encourage men to discard the harmful ideologies of traditional masculinity, that is, violence and sexism, and find flexibility in the potentially positive aspects, that is, courage and leadership. He and his team are working on a positive masculinity scale to capture people's adherence to the pro-social traits expected from men, something that has yet to be measured systematically. And when researchers strip away stereotypes and expectations, there isn't much difference in the basic behaviors of men and women. Time diary studies, for example, find that men enjoy caring for the children as much as women do. And differences in emotional displays between boys and girls are small, according to a 2013 meta-analysis, and not always in the stereotypical direction. Adolescent boys, for example, actually display fewer externalized emotions such as anger than did adolescent girls. Getting that message out to men that they're adaptable, emotional, and capable of engaging fully outside of rigid norms is what the new guidelines are designed to do. And if psychologists can focus on supporting men in breaking free of masculinity rules that don't help them, the effects could spread beyond just mental health for men. McDermott says, quote, "If we can change men," he says, "we can change the world." If you'd like to join me on my Patreon account, you will hear content not covered by mainstream media. These riveting stories will be based on my research, and I will state my opinions and give my personal insight on diverse and controversial subjects and world events not covered by mainstream media, and not supported by YouTube guidelines. So whatever I have on my Patreon, most of those will not be on my YouTube channel. Please consider becoming a member today. More of the most significant and important videos will be on my Patreon channel. Your support helps me to continue my research and keeps this YouTube channel alive. And we depend on your support, your generous charity, because we help economically challenged families here in Athens, Greece, in Kapota, and we also help the young generation with university tuition and the community around our church. Thank you.